half a rouble from Okrim, a sack of potatoes from Okrim, and so on. And though my mother was not rich, a widow with children who lived by money lending, she took no interest from Okrim. He used to pay us in garden produce, sometimes more, sometimes less. We never quarrelled with him. If the harvest was good, he filled our cellar with potatoes and cucumbers to last us all the winter, and if the harvest was bad, he used to come and plead with my mother. "Do not be offended, Mrs. Abraham, the harvest is bad." My mother forgave him and told him not to be greedy next year. "You may trust me, Mrs. Abraham, you may trust me," Okrim replied, and he kept his word. He brought us the first pickings of onions and garlic. We had new potatoes and green cucumbers before the rich folks. I heard our neighbours say more than once that the widow was not so badly off as she said. "See, they bring her the best of everything." Of course I at once told my mother what I had heard, and she poured out a few curses on our neighbours. "Salt in their eyes and stones in their hearts, whoever begrudges me what I have, let him have nothing. I wish them to be in my position next year." Naturally, I at once told my neighbours what my mother had wished them, and of course for these words they were enraged against her. They called her by a name I was ashamed to hear. Naturally I was angry, and at once told my mother of it. My mother gave me 2 smacks and told me to give up carrying Purim presents from one to the other. The smacks pained, and the words Purim presents gnawed at my brain. I could not understand why she said Purim presents. I used to rejoice when I saw Okrim from the distance, in his high boots, in his thick, white, warm, woolen pelisse, which he wore winter and summer. When I saw him, I knew he was bringing us a sackful of garden produce, and I flew into the kitchen to tell my mother the news that Okrim was coming. I must confess that there was a sort of secret love between Okrim and myself, a sort of sympathy that could not be expressed in words. We rarely spoke to one another, firstly because I did not understand his language, that is to say, I understood his but he did not understand mine. Secondly, I was shy. How could I talk to such a big Okrim? I had to ask my mother to be our interpreter. "Mother, ask him why he does not bring me some grapes." "Where's he going to get them? There are no grapes growing in the vegetable garden." "Why are there no grapes in a vegetable garden?" "Because vine trees do not grow with vegetables." "Why do vine trees not grow with vegetables?" Why, you are a fool!" cried my mother, and gave me a smack in the face. "Mrs. Abraham, do not beat the child," said Okrim, defending me. That is the sort of Gentile Okrim was, and it was in his hands I found myself that day when I waged war against the vegetables. This is what I believe took place. When Okrim came up and saw his garden in ruins, he could not at once understand what had happened. Then he saw me swinging my sword about me on all sides. He ought to have realized I was a terrible being, an evil spirit, a demon, and crossed himself several times. When he saw that it was a Jewish boy who was fighting so vigorously and with a wooden sword, he took hold of me by the ear with so much force that I collapsed, fell to the ground, and screamed in a voice unlike my own, "Oh, oh, oh! Who is pulling me by the ear?" It was only after Okrim had given me a few good thumps and several resounding smacks that we encountered each other's eyes and recognized one another. We were both so astonished that we were speechless. "Mrs. Abraham's boy!" cried Okrim, and he crossed himself. He began to realize the ruin I had brought to his garden. He scrutinized each bed and examined each little stick. He was so overcome that the tears filled his eyes. He stood facing me, his hands folded, and he asked me only one solitary question. "Why have you done this to me?" It was only then that I realized the mischief I had done and whom I had done it to. I was so amazed at myself that I could only repeat, "Why? Why?" "Come," said Ockram, and took me by the hand. I was bowed to the earth with fear. I imagined he was going to make an end of me. But Ockram did not touch me. He only held me so tightly by the hand that my eyes began to bulge from my head. He brought me home to my mother and told her everything, and left me entirely in her hands. Need I tell you what I got from my mother? Need I describe for you her anger and her fright, and how she wrung her hands when Ockram told her in detail all that had taken place in his garden, and of all the damage I had done to his vegetables? Ockram took his stick and showed my mother how I had destroyed everything on all sides, how I had smashed and broken and trampled down everything with my feet, pulled the little potatoes out of the ground, and torn the tops off the little onions and the garlic that were just showing above the earth. "And why? And wherefore? Why, Mrs. Abraham, why?" Ockram could say no more. The sobs stuck in his throat and choked him. I must tell you the real truth, children. I would rather Ockram with the strong arms had beaten me than have got what I did from my mother before Shevuous, and what the teacher gave me after Shevuous. And the shame of it all. I was reminded of it all the year round by the boys at Cheder. They gave me a nickname, the Gardener. I was Yossel the Gardener. This nickname stuck to me almost until the day I was married. That is how I went to gather greens for Shevuous. End of chapter 8.